Thanks everybody for coming, especially to this kind of strange presentation for MIX. My name is Shelley Evanson, and I work in Microsoft Fuse Labs as a principal user experience designer. So you're probably wondering, that's in Cambridge, you're wondering what Fuse is, what we do. Well, we actually look at the future of social experience. And we have 3 labs, one in Cambridge in the UK, one in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and then also a group in Redmond, all together as Fuse. And like it says here, we look at the future of social experience, real-time and rich media. Two of the things that our group in Cambridge actually had the pleasure of contributing to were things that you have experienced as Bing Twitter and Bing Twitter Maps. So that's Fuse. But a lot of what I'm actually going to talk about today is not about Fuse. It's really all about service and social. Up until last July, I was a professor at Carnegie Mellon University. And one of the things that I introduced to Carnegie Mellon students was the notion of service design. And for those of you who don't know, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. But service design has been really popular in the UK for, or actually all throughout Europe for probably about 15 years. And more recently has come to awareness here in the States and is now really interesting. And just this last weekend, there was a really nice supplement in The Guardian in the UK on service design and what it means and why it's important. So the talk today really has 4 parts. I'm going to give you a little context where I'm coming from, talk specifically about service design, and then talk about social experience, what I've sort of been infusing myself with since I came to Fuse back in July, and what I think some of the implications are when service and social come together. So let's get started. You can start the timer. So the context. I think that people are changing. When I was a kid, I used to order things from a Sears robot catalog. I grew up in a small town in Ohio called Vermillion. I mean, how lucky to grow up in a town that's named after a color as a designer. But the point is that I would search through this giant catalog for days and days, weeks on end, finally make a selection. We would order it, and I would wait 6 weeks to go and then pick it up at the store. And then if it wasn't right, boy, was I disappointed, because it was like, what a long process to go through. Now, of course, I can order shoes from Zappos at 8 o'clock at night, and by 8 in the morning, they're at my front door. Wow, how different. My kids grew up in a world where they can't remember what it was like before FedEx. They actually can't remember very much before the internet. But I think that people's expectations, our world, and the demands that we have sort of dramatically changed. And we're really moving up Maslow's hierarchy. We're not worried about, finding food every day. At least many of us are not. But there's too much information to cope with. I also think people are participating in designing in ways that they haven't before. So clearly, I mean, here at MIX, it's really obvious that technology is really changing. The world is going to become chock full of sensors everywhere, all the time. And I think that that's going to have a huge impact on what our daily experience is all about. And then business is changing. The way that we relate to businesses has completely changed. We are not only concerned with value, we want things that we pay money for, and we want a certain amount of value coming back. But we also want to be associated with organizations that have values that reflect our own. So we want to be like the companies that we do business with. This is important for us. Can you start the timer, please? Okay, so I love this chart from Ellie Blevis. So on the left, this is the world that thinks of design as all that stuff that goes on at HGTV. Not that that's not fun and wonderful, but that's the world's perception of what design is. There's very few people who think about design in the way that I'm talking about it today, the way that we talk about it here at MIX, but very small number. What I really love is this quote from Moholy Nash. Way back in 1938, can you imagine this? That he said it's the integration of technical, social, economic factors, biological necessities, in combination with that wonderful stuff of shape, color, volume, and space. So way back in 1938, he was thinking about this. I think that's fabulous. Herb Simon, and this was really important when I was teaching at Carnegie Mellon because he also taught at Carnegie Mellon, talked about the fact that everybody designs. Everybody who changes a situation from one situation to another, that's designing. I mean, I think that we want to think about design differently, and we'll get there. But I think that that's really important. Marty Neumeier goes so far to say design is change. I think his book, The Designful Company, is a fabulous book. I recommend that to everybody. So I think change can be designed. And I think that the presentation, I don't know how many of you were at the presentation yesterday on the design language, but I think it was so clear that the Windows Mobile Phone 7, the design language, the design has clearly been conceived for change. And I think that that's really fabulous. And good design will lead to really good changes. All right. So what is service design? What am I talking about here? I don't know how many of you can see that little string across the top there, but that's my trip. I got in a metro cab in Boston, went to Logan Airport, which is BOS, stopped at a Starbucks, got a Starbucks, got on United, came to Las Vegas, got in another cab to the Mandalay. I'll be taking another cab back to LA, to the airport here in Las Vegas. Then I have to go through Cleveland to get to Boston, and then I'll probably get a Starbucks on the other end before I hop in the cab. So think about all of those providers all together. Every single person, from the person I sat next to on the airplane, who was also coming to MIX, to the person, the woman at Starbucks, she had an impact on my perception of my trip here. So service experiences have many dimensions like this. So I think if this is my trip and all of those different service providers come together to deliver that trip for me, but they're also being co-produced at the same time by me, all the back-end systems, and all of the people that happen to either be standing next to me or delivering the service for me. I often describe the first time, this is before I worked for Microsoft, when I bought my first iPhone. So I was a silly person. I was living in Pittsburgh at the time, and I drove by the Apple store, and I saw the line wasn't very long, so I thought, well, what the heck, I'll go stand in line. It's a beautiful day. I have papers to read. I'll do that. So I stood in line, and as I stood in line, a phenomenal thing happened. They came out and they gave us coupons to buy a coffee for afterwards. It was really getting hot. They handed out waters for us. So we were standing in line, and we were, sharing the experience with all the other people around us. And then they opened the doors. We got to go in. The whole system was completely orchestrated. It was fabulous. We were applauded, handshakes as we went out. It was this incredible drama that was the experience of buying that phone. And the drama didn't stop when I got home and opened the package. It was a wonderful service experience. It was like no other phone purchase that I had ever gone through, I'll tell you that. It was very, very different. When I got the second phone, because I am a geek, and I had to get the next latest one, I went to the Apple Store again. Oh my gosh, what a contrast. What a contrast for this company that always coordinates everything. It was the worst possible experience. I had to stand in line behind some ropes. It wasn't clear whether I was really in line or not in line because there were all sorts of people sort of milling about. And there was a guy who came up, and I was just dressed in jeans and casual, and there was a guy who came up and he was in a suit and he started to cut in front of me. And I said, wait a minute. And he said, well, I'm really busy. I really need to get this done right away. And I said, great, so do I. And what was interesting is the person from the Apple side interacted with him and took his order and went on and kept going on. And I was like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And they said, well, we're not allowed to argue with a customer, so it didn't really matter if this was wrong or not. And so they had the whole thing messed up. Anyway, so real drama in both of those. There's drastic difference in the first to the second. So what service is really all about are 5 things. Some people actually say there's 7, and this relates to the 4 P's in marketing. But services are about people, they're about products, they're about places, they're about process, and they're about performance. And what I love about this image from Christopher Alexander's book is that it registers all of those things in this one image. Because what it's talking about, you can imagine, so there's all those people who are having the conversation about this meal. There is the chef that is putting the meal together. That's the product. They're having lunch there. It's in this really, you can just imagine how busy and dynamic this place is. The process, putting the food together in line, has to occur, it has to have the right ingredients or it's going to taste horrible. And then clearly there's a performance. This is what the Benihana restaurants are all sort of designed around. It's this performance. So service is really about all of these things. So in service, people interact with producers via touch points that foster experiences, like the ticket gate at a parking garage. The touch point experiences form a larger arc, or something we call the customer journey. Here is a representation of a journey of my brain tumor. Very different than going to the parking garage, but those are both service experiences. And then the impression, all of those things brought together, is really the brand. All of those touch points, that whole journey makes up the impression of the brand for both the providers and for people. So as a service provider, you have to think about who or what you're going to provide. And it's a person-to-person, person-to-machine, or machine-to-machine. So there can be stuff going on in the background, machine-to-machine interactions that are still a part of that service. In service, we also talk about sort of front stage and backstage. So front stage are those people who are at this hotel, who are greeting you at the desk and whatever. Backstage people are the people who are doing the laundry every day so that you have clean sheets the next morning. So I'm going to show you some service project examples from Carnegie Mellon. The first one we started with was the parking garage. This is a kind of silly thing, but so you can see that there is a sign there that says the garage is full, leaseholders only. And I had the students start with this because I thought it's something that's really tangible, something we experience every day. So what you also see are the backup lights of this car, because the car is backing up. Because the fabulous thing about this garage is even though it was full, if you drive up, you can see that there are empty spaces. Because all of the reserve spaces are right there in front, but you can't actually see the reserve signs until you drive up to the gate. You can't go through the gate, and then you have to back up, and then everybody else has to back up to allow you to get out. So that's a simple service environment. So the very first touch point is this thing that gives you the ticket. So one of the things that I should mention is that in the service projects that we did at Carnegie Mellon, we really followed the process of doing full immersive research. The students watched people parking for many, many days. They did an analysis of that research, developed design themes, and came out with what they thought were good recommendations. And we actually included lots of people, both conventional designers and lots of people from computer science. So the solution I'm going to show you here is a redesigned service from the computer science team's recommendation. So they thought, well, let's not have the first touch point actually be at the garage at all. Let's reserve the parking space before you get there on your phone. When you get there, you should be able to see that the garage is full from far away so that you don't, so that you don't actually drive up and see that there's spaces and whatever. And then because they were really sort of geeky, they said, well, let's use the robot receptionists so that every individual person can be greeted based on their swiping of their card, and they would know if they spoke different languages. It would be really fun. And so on. Throughout the garage, more information was provided so that you could actually have a much better parking experience. It's a better service. Another service that we looked at was the Pittsburgh Library. One of the things that's a real challenge for cities, I was just hearing it on NPR as I was driving the day before I left Boston, that Boston is also having trouble with their libraries and being able to keep them running. They might have to close some. In Pittsburgh, one of the other challenges that they have is that the population is aging. And actually in Pittsburgh, it's older than Dade County, Florida, which is shocking. So one of the things that we thought, well, let's really try a hard problem. Let's see if we can get young people to stay and help the library at the same time. So as I said, this was representation of some of the quotes from the research that the students did. The last time I was at the library was about 2 months ago to use the bathroom. Yeah, I have a card, but, and really the library is not very relevant. So the team here came up with a set of services for the young professional because young professionals they found were really interested in networking and in meeting other young people. They really wanted to be able to advance their careers. So how could they get some learning outside of the workplace because they were always working? So this team designed a set of experiences that would allow and sort of take the library out of the library and back into the community and allow young people to meet. So the reason I wanted to also show you this is because this shows you all of the sort of service system components that had to come together in order to conceive of that experience. So when we're talking about services, we're not only talking about designing stuff, we're designing roles often. This was a really challenging project. We worked with the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and this is an illustration of Dr. Kassam. And one of the things that he does is non-invasive brain surgery. And this is really special because most of these people that he's now helping weren't able, they had inoperable brain tumors before. So there is enormous sort of pent-up demand for his services. So oftentimes what would happen is that people could be waiting in the waiting room for up to 4 hours. And it wasn't, it's like University of Pittsburgh Medical Center is one of the top hospitals systems in the United States. It wasn't a fault of theirs. It was this man really wanted to see as many patients as possible. So the students were told, well, so how do you reduce that wait time? And the way that they sort of turned it around was they said, actually, we're not going to reduce wait time. We're going to embrace wait time, and we're going to give people other things to do so that when they have that moment, when they have that 2 minutes with Dr. Kassam, they really have all of the information that they need. They have the questions in hand to make the most of that really precious time that they have with him. So this is a very simple thing. They actually designed a sort of chat system for in the waiting room, but this is a representation of the brochure that they developed to help people understand what's it going to be like. I have brain surgery, I have a brain tumor. What's my experience going to be like? And of course, everybody's experience is going to be different, but at least it gives them an overview. It was never, ever really printed out for anyone before. And it's kind of, again, really simple, silly, but based on doing really good observational research and developing the right kinds of design principles, they were able to come up with this. We also, last year, were lucky enough to do work with the Mayo Clinic. And we had a really great student who actually went to work at the Spark Innovation Lab at the Mayo Clinic. And Maggie helped us in looking at the problem, again, another really small problem. How do we deal with the fact that there's fewer primary care physicians than there are patients now? So it means that care is actually going to have to change. People are going to have to change. Providers are going to have to change. The payers are going to have to change the way they think about it because the system is not going to function. So how do you reconceive that? This particular team said, let's look at proactive care. Let's find ways to help people find better primary care physicians that match them, get points for being healthy with a point system, actually find them buddies to work out with that are co-located, help them make better choices about their nutrition at the grocery store, and then also tie in all of that information back into a system that can be shared by both the people and their providers and the payers. So here's the system, service system components that this team conceived of. You know, this electronic card, the equipment that was tied in, a portal, new roles, this Maven who would introduce you, interview you, go through sort of a personality survey to find out what kind of patient you were, and then actually match you up with appropriate people. So service is about system components, and it's all of these kinds of things. So service designing is what I like to call U2, E2, D2, P2. So it's useful, usable, effective, efficient, desirable, differentiated for both providers and the people. And it's really a meta-design activity because we're all co-producing this experience. As designers, we're designing the resources for people to produce these experiences for themselves. Okay, so now onto the social piece. And remember, I'm a newbie in social. But I think what we're describing here are people connecting and building through communities, sharing information and influence. I love this. There's this wonderful animation that just came out last week, a beautiful typography showing all of these stats. 260 billion page views per month. Amazing. About half of the United States population was on a social networking site. And it's changing. This is Twitter's growth year over year. David Carr wrote this really wonderful piece on the 1st of January on why Twitter will endure. And I love this quote. I'm in a narrative in more things in any given moment than I ever thought possible. I am so connected. It's wonderful. Howard Rheingold says it's a new kind of literacy. We have to skill people to be literate in participatory media. What are we doing to do that? I also really like this. Jim Stadel called this a stimulusaholic. Okay, so I have this problem. I don't know how many of you have this problem where I have to check my phone all the time. You know, it's not that I just can wait for it to buzz. I have to check it all the time. So I have a colleague who was driving to work a couple weeks ago. I showed her this and she said, oh my gosh, this is so me. She said, today I was so proud of myself because I had my purse in the back seat. I have a 20-minute drive to work and I did not stop to get my phone out of my purse. I made it all the way to work without looking at my phone while I'm driving. It's pervasive in so many different areas. I love this. This is Bundle, where they show you comparisons of household spending in different locations across the country. I think this is fabulous. I also think that, you know, the New York Times is doing God's work in helping people read and understand data better. And I think this is a really nice example of that. This one, Blippy, you guys know Blippy? This is where you share what you've purchased with your credit card constantly with your social network. I personally have a hard time with this one, but you know. Product design, Quirky. Quirky is a place where you can pay $99, submit your idea, crowdsource all of the research, the branding, all of these different things, and all of those people who contribute their time, they get a cut of the product if you get enough pre-purchases to actually get it produced. So it's a whole sort of ecology for producing new products. Really interesting. The 61, another example for music. I think it's where you can get your friends together and vote things up. Also a really interesting interface. Patients like me, I think, and I have a really strong interest in healthcare, as you'll see, but I think patients like me have been phenomenal at bringing people together who before had no avenues for having conversations with each other. And what it's allowed them to do is to have more power, to learn more about how their treatment might be different, and to be able to be sort of groups to actually do tests with. But it's also happening with physicians. This is Sermo, and Sermo allows physicians to go online and describe difficult diagnoses that they're having trouble making, difficult cases, and get sort of crowdsourced opinions about what the answer might be. I think it's fabulous. I read a statistic just yesterday that about 60% of the physicians in the United States either have participated in social networking or plan to in the next year. Okay, so what really happens when service and social collide? I think it's actually the inevitable extension of all services. I think everything we do will become more social, every service that we use. Imagine being on an airplane and you tweet this because you have the ability, because you have wireless on the plane. The guy next to me seems to be the leader of a cult involving Axe body spray. So he's like this enormous cologne thing, okay? So this was tweeted while on the airplane. A couple minutes later, the flight attendant walks up to that person and says, "Sir, would you be more comfortable in a seat in the bulkhead?" I think this is exactly the example of how services are going to change. When he got home, he got this from @Virgin America. Perhaps we should develop a screening process for Axe. So, brand. Think about that brand presence coming through, that personality coming through. Really kind of funny. So again, this was David Carr in that same article. And what he said was, it was creepy and comforting all at once. How creepy to think I'm just sitting here tweeting, but the guy back there knows who I am and came up to me and talked to me. Really, really interesting. And again, I think a perfect example of how every service is going to change. So this is my same trip. Now that trip is shared. I check in with Foursquare or the competitor to that. And I'm tweeting, I'm sending pictures, I'm doing all of these things. A very different trip now. So it's co-produced. So how will services really change? I think this is a really good example, again, out in the world. Some of these things are precursors. They're not completely integrated yet, but this is Yelp Monocle, where I can look up my street with my phone and see. The only thing that's missing here is which one has a table right now that I could, because that's actually an issue in my neighborhood. So small change, which is available. There's no reason why that shouldn't be there. Government services. Do you guys know about this one? This is peer-to-patent. So what it does is it crowdsources patent information. So it takes forever to get patents because it takes so long to research the prior art. And so what they're doing is they're getting the community to offer up what is the prior art. Really, really interesting. Other examples of government services changing, both city-sourced and see-click-fix, so that you can report issues in your neighborhood, everything from, trash to potholes to broken lights to where you think there needs to be a new kind of light or a stop sign or whatever. So it's changing the way government services are delivered. So now the government actually has to participate in updating the information so that they can prove that they're actually doing some things for you. This one I think is fascinating. So you all remember the scene in Minority Report when Tom Cruise walks into the Gap and they say something like, "Greetings, Mr. Yamamoto, the last time you walked in here," because he had different eyes, so he had Mr. Yamamoto's eyes. But the retailer recognized him. The Gap recognized him. This just came, I just ran across this a couple weeks ago, and what I think is really fascinating about this is that what it's doing is taking my photograph and going back to the server, checking through machine learning to see if it's me, and then based on the fact that it's me, showing you all of the social networks that I'm associated with. So there's no reason why this can't be true at the Gap. No. It's like I walk into the Gap, they know it's me because I've registered through a social network, or I follow them on Facebook or whatever. They have my photo, they can go back to it. Really, really interesting. It's called Recognizer. Here's one that I think is particularly interesting. As I said, I have this very, very strong interest in healthcare. This is from Cambridge Consulting, and it's called VenaHub. And it's not only that you have access and can take around all of your medical health-related information with you on this little USB, but what it also has is a part of the system, and they have this great video. It's not on YouTube, it's on one of those other ones, but it can register compliance. So if you have to use an inhaler or you have to test your blood sugar, it records that information. It also takes sensor data that you have if you're wearing a sensor. Normally I'm wearing a sensor, but I misplaced mine before I came on my trip. And it also allows you to compete if you're a young person in particular. They have something they call Health Book, very much like one of my student projects, that allows you to get points and compete with other people for compliance, because compliance is such a big issue. So they have tied together both the social networking, they have the data recording, the integration of the sensor data, all of those things all tied together in this one system. Very interesting. So I think what we're seeing here is self-service health and real-time, real-life decision support. And I think what we're really going to, when we look at service and social mashed together, is real-time, real-life, crowdsourced decision support for just about everything. Everything from which restaurant should I choose to go to am I going to walk there, or am I going to drive my car? Or am I going to pick this physician or this restaurant or whatever? I think they're all going to be mashed together. So what do you think? Is it creepy? Everybody knowing what I'm doing? Huh? A little bit. It's also kind of comforting. So I think what's really fabulous, such an opportunity for us, is that what we do is we provide the affordances for conversation. And we're going to be doing that about everywhere, through all different kinds of screens, through the environment, sensor data in location, through glyphs, through tags, all of that stuff. We get to design all of that. That's pretty cool. What I also think is really going to change is that it's not only about coordination so that I can meet up with my friends in the right place, or collaboration, but I honestly believe when you start to get the information that you need in the moment, at the moment that you need it, we have a tremendous opportunity for enhancing learning. That we're really at that point, this real opportunity to help people get better, to use their heads better. And I think that that's really exciting. So, I think the challenge for all of us is really, how do we make that so it really is comforting and a little less creepy? Thank you. Any questions? I have no idea what the time was because you started it so late. Do we have time for questions? Is it? Any questions? Yeah?
Do you have any concerns about how doctors will interact with patients?
How doctors will interact with patients. I think that doctors are really changing. And I think, again, this notion that at least 60% are saying that they're participating in, I think what we have to worry about are things like HIPAA rules, privacy. They're really, really worried that it's going to be hard for them to walk that line between privacy and public. And so I think it will change. And I think that they'll get more collaborative. And I think that that's a really wonderful thing. I think that that's clearly an opportunity. When you have really challenging, most of the cases are not that challenging, but when you have a challenging case, not everybody is housed. And so it would be really nice to be able to source that. So I think it's really exciting that way. Yeah?
How about opportunities for companies to proactively get in touch with their customers?
What are the opportunities for what?
For companies to proactively get in touch with their customers. For example, if a customer is unhappy with self-service and
Yeah.
they tweet about it or they Facebook about it, and somehow the company through the channels get hold of that complaint. Like, is there an issue of privacy?
I think there is, and I think again that's the whole thing about getting David Carr getting that direct message from Virgin. It's kind of creepy, It's like everybody knows about it. But on the other hand, I think that brands are going to be participating. You have to understand that everybody produces the brand, and so if you want to, companies just don't have control anymore. So you have to be aware, and I think that there's a real opportunity for developing tools for companies to be able to participate in way more effective ways. I mean, I think that like the overviews that I've seen for companies to be able to sort of see the tweet stream is just like, boy, they're really overwhelming. There's lots of opportunities there. Yeah.
Has there been any attempts made to do sort of I guess I'd call it a design language for understanding the social stream of data coming in?
Boy, I am not aware of that, but I clearly think that there are design language opportunities for service design, and so thinking about the social as a clear component of that, again, that's sort of what I'm advocating, is that we as designers have to make that a part of everything that we do. So yeah, I think there's opportunities, but I'm not aware of anybody who's doing that directly now. Yeah.
Sorry, I have one last question.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure it's creepy for a lot of people from a customer perspective. From your experience, how do clients see this opportunity? What's their plan?
Yeah, well, I think that clearly it's coming. And I think the challenge that companies have, I mean, I think they've just started to learn about social in the first place. And now, oh my gosh, now what else do we have to do? So I think that there's this kind of deer in the headlights. But there have been some companies just have done phenomenal jobs. And I think some, you see that you have a person who's the brand voice who just like shouldn't be. And then there are people who are, because they're just like way too personal. for a company. And again, I think that they're learning, but they're really open to it because I think they've really realized that they don't have the control anymore. And so it's either participate or die, right? So, anyhow, yes?
Especially in healthcare, you deal with a lot of people that are not so connected, I would guess. So how do you deal with that? And is there, so do you guys do any research on that? How do you bridge the gap between maybe what you would like to do in terms of technology in your service design, and on the other hand, customers you deal with and users you have to deal with that are not that far yet?
Right. I think that, as populations age, I think there is a transition. And one of the projects that we also did with Intel when I was at Carnegie Mellon, with Intel and University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, was really sort of trying to look at robotics and technologies with older people, and actually the findings from the user research made us sort of step back and actually say, well, actually, let's bring the technology to the boomers, because they're the ones who are really going to be able to leverage that technology, are much more accustomed to it, and then they can sort of seamlessly provide that transition to the older population. But I think that that's a real challenge, but it gets less challenging every day. And I think as we have more and more capabilities with phones, where almost everyone has a phone, and different kinds of interfaces, I think I've seen a lot of concept stuff that are sort of ways to get the technology out to those populations in a way that is really easy to manage. So, yeah, that's it. Well, thank you all for listening. I appreciate your participation. Please fill out your evaluation forms as well. I guess there's a little reminder. Your feedback is important. Thanks.